I'll admit, 2015 wasn't really the biggest year for animated features, since not many of them would stand out as something extraordinary. But it was nice to see the return of those who were absent for the previous year to reintroduce their capabilities along with the regulars and newcomers. From the old kings at Pixar, to the new champions at Illumination, to the lovely chaps at Aardman, and of course, the bumbling idiots at Sony. However, the way they were introduced may vary a bit. Some came back in a way that isn't clearly their strongest efforts, but the few that came out strong will be fondly remembered. I'm Animat, and these are the top 5 best and worst animated films of 2015.
Hey, now, for those of you who kept count on how many animated films there were during 2015, you may have noticed that there have only been 9. And even some of you are in a little bit of a panic about this because that's not necessarily enough to do a top 5 best and worst animated films of 2015. Okay, now, yes, I know for a fact that there haven't been just 9 animated films that were released during 2015. That I know, but I'm only talking about the ones that got a worldwide release, that pretty much have been distributed all over the world, or at the very least, got distributed in North America. So these do not count the ones that got a very limited release, or the ones that are just independent films. So movies like Ghost in the Shell, the new movie, or Khalil Gibran's The Prophet don't necessarily count here. However, I'm just here to say, don't you guys worry, I know what to do in this situation. Now, since there are only 9 animated films, I can actually work with this. So instead of doing a top 5 best and worst animated films of 2015, I'm only going to do a top 4. That way, it'll stay consistent to the previous list, except instead of doing all 5, I'm just going to remove the number 5 of best and worst. So that way the problem will be easily solved, and yeah, the video will stay the same and it'll still be good. So if we're all cool, great. However, if you do have any complaints about this decision, or if you have any complaints regarding whatever I say in this video, well, the only thing I say to you is just, well, that's your problem, not mine. So, with that said, let's get the list started!
Number 4. Worst. Minions. Considering how these little guys became a pop culture icon thanks to the great success of the Despicable Me films, it's no surprise to see that the Minions would end up with their own feature. Unfortunately though, their adventures aren't as strong as when they were with Gru. The Minions' adventures in late 60s London ended up delivering a generically weak and predictable plot, and the temporary villains that they found, Scarlet Overkill and her husband Herb, are unnecessarily over the top. I get that they want to be comedic villains, but in a movie called Minions, I'm sure there's already enough humor as it is. But just because it landed on the worst pile, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad movie. As it is, Minions is actually quite an enjoyable film. The humor is great, the Minions themselves are likable, the animation is fun, and the history of the characters give them a new interesting depth. There have been better films this year, sure, but this one still manages to do well on its own. But either if it's in the best or worst list, Minions will still remain as one of the biggest animated features of all time. No, seriously, have you seen how much it made at the box office? It became the first ever non-Disney animated film to surpass $1 billion. These guys can literally just fart out money whenever they want.
Guys, cut it out. This is really unprofessional.
Number 3. Home. Standing as DreamWorks' only contender this year, this ended up becoming one of their weaker films. In a strange twist, DreamWorks decided to make a movie that was meant for a much younger audience, resulting it with pretty bad writing that consists of an easily predictable and generic story, one-dimensional characters, very low-brow and juvenile humor, and a message of friendship and making mistakes is okay that feels very forced upon the audience. Even the voiceover work just feels all over the place, with Rihanna underacting and Jim Parsons overacting. What keeps it away from being in the levels of Shark Tale bad though, is that at least the animation is very well done. It's colorful, creative, the simplicity of the designs complement the film's kid-friendly tone, and the chase scenes do make it a bit engaging. That, and you can tell that the heart is in the right place. Like, it shows that DreamWorks didn't make this to cash in on little kids. The filmmakers just want to make something that would be enjoyable for them, while also giving them a nice little lesson. It's not the most hateable movie they've made, but considering that this is from DreamWorks, it's obvious that they can do much better than what they did with The Booth.
Can I come into that out now?
No.
But I can. You are just having to take away the piece of wood.
Number 2. Hotel Transylvania 2. Jumping from one movie made just for kids to another, with this one though, nobody would ever be foolish to believe that there would be heart or effort in something made by Adam Sandler or Sony Pictures Animation. The reason why this movie fails is that, instead of being a movie, as it should, it rather wants to be a 90-minute cartoon, and a bad one at that. Because of this, it results the film to have barely even a plot, Sony's signature subpar childish animation, and characters that either barely have any purpose, barely a personality, or are barely even likable. As for the humor, they all end up being hit and miss, where all the actual funny moments are shown in the trailers. For years, Sony desperately tries to be so over the top and cartoony with their films, but they're so ignorant of their mistakes and poor decisions that they never realize that what they're doing never even worked to begin with. And before anyone says anything, no, the phrase, "it's cartoony because it's a cartoon," is a stupidly terrible excuse that makes the medium look bad. It is as idiotic, shameless, and closed-minded as the studio that made this picture. The only good thing that can be said is that at the very least, it is not Adam Sandler's nor Sony's worst movie that they've done. Trust me, they've already proved that they can do much worse than this. But for what it is, it ended up flying as well as Dennis.
Here we go! He's getting too close to the ground! You know what? He's not gonna fly.
And the number 1 worst animated film of 2015 is... Strange Magic. Out of all the animated features released this year, how did this one get to be the worst, even over a sequel to a Sony Pictures Animation movie? Well, that's easy. The worst that Hotel Transylvania 2 can get is just bad. The worst that Strange Magic can get is just cringeworthy. Almost everything in this film is executed in a way that is disastrous, featuring some of the worst writing in an animated feature. It's like taking some of the worst elements of Glee and High School Musical and throw in a fantasy theme to hope that it'll look somewhat interesting. The love story is frustratingly predictable and broken with all the side plots. The characters are either forgettably generic or hateably stupid, and the musical numbers are like if they're taken from the most random playlist and turned them all into disgustingly bland pop songs. The only thing done well here is the execution of the animation. But even at that, the designs look like they were ripped off directly from something like Blue Sky's Epic. This movie is so bad that even Disney wanted nothing to do with this, and I even have proof that this is the case. The way that they announced the project just 2 months before its release, the minimal amount of marketing, how this movie is under the Touchstone banner, even if it's not aimed for a more adult audience, and how this film only got a DVD release. This didn't even get a chance to be on Blu-ray or digital HD. It is that pathetic. Out of all the things that came out of George Lucas' head, from the Star Wars prequels to Jar Jar Binks to Howard the Duck to the Star Wars Holiday Special, Strange Magic is hands down the worst of them all, and that is why it is the #1 worst animated film of 2015. Now, before we lighten things up with some of the best that 2015 can offer, I'd like to have an honorable mention. The Good Dinosaur. Since this year was marked as the first time ever that Pixar gave us 2 films, the second feature release ended up being one of their most heartfelt. Well, at least in terms of the whole movie, that's not counting the individual scenes. The Good Dinosaur manages to bring out something strong with some beautiful animation, memorable characters, and the emotional friendship between Arlo and Spot. Sadly, in terms of its production troubles and how it came out, it ended up becoming almost identical to Brave, where it ended up with some problems. While the bond between the main characters is strong, the writing is not, due to how the story is completely straightforward and predictable, and when you take Spot out of the equation, Arlo is easily one of Pixar's weakest protagonists. That and the cartoony character design does not fit the movie at all in terms of the film's more serious tone and hyper-realistic backgrounds. As the title applies, The Good Dinosaur is simply good. Not Pixar good, but just good. Number 4. Shaun the Sheep Movie. At first glance, this seems like your typical animated kids film. It's about a bunch of sheep trying to save their farmer in the big city. Doesn't sound all that appealing, and it feels rather simple compared to Armin's previous works. That is true, until you actually see it and discover something unlike any other mainstream animated feature. What makes Shaun the Sheep Movie unique is actually its simplicity, down to the point that it doesn't even have dialogue. This results the film to become heartwarming, clever, charming, funny, and even engaging. And since the animators are now the true stars of the feature, they can proudly display what they can do by presenting some great stop-motion animation on these lovable characters. It's highly doubtful that we'll see another movie like this from a big-name animation studio, since many of them are so dependent on having celebrities doing voices for marketing purposes. But Shaun will always be remembered for giving us something that is simply unique. Number 3. The SpongeBob Movie, Sponge Out of Water. Ever since his first movie, SpongeBob would have a hard time to get his popularity back to the levels of his golden age in the early 2000s. But then came series creator Stephen Hillenburg, who decided to return to the Yellow Sponge and be the executive producer and writer for the second movie. And the result made everyone say that the SpongeBob we all knew and loved is back. With Sponge Out of Water, the movie successfully recaptures what made the original show great, with an absurdly comedic story that holds the right amount of nonsense, the same memorable characters that are able to deliver the strong humor, and the impressive use of animation that uses all 3 mediums very well. However, like SpongeBob and Patrick themselves, the film does come with a few quirks. Some elements in the story are clearly taken from previous SpongeBob works, and the marketing is just completely misleading. You'd think this would be more of a CGI live-action hybrid with what the trailers are showing, but they don't even go to the surface until the 3rd act. But even if the trailer didn't deliver what we'd expect from the film, SpongeBob did deliver something that we know we enjoy.
When is this sugar gonna wear off?
Number 2. The Peanuts Movie. Something completely different was going on at Blue Sky when they went to make this movie. Instead of making another dumb cash-grabbing Ice Age sequel, they decided to be more serious and make this movie as faithful as possible to the original comics and TV specials, where even Charles Schulz himself would be proud of their efforts. By keeping its wholesome and simple tone, the Peanuts movie contains a lot of charm, a lot of heart, the same characters that everyone knows and loves voiced by some very talented kids, and animation that some may argue could be groundbreaking. However, the one thing about being as faithful as possible to the original source material is that you also end up adapting some of its flaws. The story feels a little clumsy, the little red-haired girl is barely a character, and as fun as the Red Baron scenes are, they barely serve a purpose to the main plot. But even with that, like Charlie Brown himself, the movie may have a bit of its flaws, but we can't help but love it nonetheless.
And Gullible. I forgot to mention Gullible.
And the #1 best animated film of 2015 is Inside Out. After receiving follow-ups that failed to reach Pixar's standards of quality, here is a film that reminds us why they were considered as the greatest in the industry. Fueled by a concept that is absolutely genius, Inside Out is capable of unleashing a fantastically original story, creative animation that is the definition of powered by imagination, and unforgettable characters that wonderfully illustrates not only who Riley is, but who we are as well. It is a movie that is so well crafted that audiences had to resort to the short to find any flaws. Like I said before, this wasn't a big year for animated features, and some might look back at only a couple of them and find that they were just enjoyably good. With Inside Out, on the other hand, this will be the one animated movie this year that will be remembered for a long time. Not just as one of the best films of the year, but also as one of the best animated features of the decade. But above all else, Inside Out will always be remembered as the #1 best animated film of 2015. And that's all I've got for the top 4 best and worst animated films of 2015. We may not have gotten a lot of animated movies during that time, but I'm sure that 2016 will pick up the slack. Hell no! With all the award buzz, I'd be down for this. Hell yeah! Might get a good laugh. Really curious about this. I've never played the game, so we'll see. Strangely optimistic about this. A sequel to that? Okay. Should be cute. Why won't you die? About time we get something adult. I want to see what Travis has in store. Might sound interesting, actually. DreamWorks? What the fridge are you doing? Possible classic in the making, and hey look, another Cats Don't Dance. See you later, dudes.
Well, I just saved our lives. Yeah, you're welcome.